Good morning and welcome to Reopening Connecticut Arts Venues, Science-Based Safety. I'm Eric Dillner, the CEO of the Shoreline Arts Alliance and the chair of this task force. The mission of our task force is to offer you the opportunity to reopen your arts venue from a public health perspective, provide a listening and sharing platform, and to help consumer confidence through science. As we continue our site visits and hear stories of your offerings, we continue to marvel at the wonderfully unique opportunities you, your creative industry, have to offer humanity. We're so thankful for your attention to doing everything that you can to reopen with science as your guide and remain open safely. To be straightforward, today's seminar had me a bit worried. I had some of the same thoughts that many of you may be feeling. What does HVAC stand for? How do I talk about this? My landlord deals with all that. I already wear too many hats. How could I possibly be expected to deal with airflow? Well, today our team is ready to put you at ease. All you need today is your creativity hat. We encourage everyone to attend each of the webinars and follow Shoreline Arts Alliance's YouTube channel and Facebook, as we will begin releasing videos of our site visits soon. Matter of fact, later today, you will find the tips and tools for your outdoor venues. During our discussion today, let's use Q&A in Zoom for asking questions and reserve the chat for resource sharing, telling us about your successes and your moments of aha. This is how this works. Sten Fairmoon, the Dean of Public Health, and his team are extraordinarily generous with their time. And again, I ask you to continue sending questions directly to us, the task force, so that then we can funnel them directly to those who can help us with that. Well, let's meet the folks who are here to reopen Connecticut arts venues with you and help us keep safe. Sten Fairmoon, the Dean of Public Health, has passed the torch today to Crystal Paulette. Crystal is an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences of the Yale School of Public Health. She also holds an appointment in the School of Engineering and Applied Science. Her research is focused on understanding our exposure to environmental factors and the impact on health. Crystal is particularly interested in chemical and biological exposures in indoor spaces, right in line with what we need today. Today, we also have Crystal's colleague, Julie Paquette. Julie is a director of engineering and energy management at Yale University. As a registered professional engineer in Connecticut, she has extensive experience in the assessment, design, construction, and operation of high-performance building systems, including a broad range in museum, library, performing, and studio art facilities. Julie's work over the past 4 months has been focused on the implementation of practical improvements to existing mechanical systems in response to the urgent public health needs, and in support of long-term resilience and sustainability in the built environment. Needless to say, Sten Fairmoon, my co-chair and Dean of Public Health, has left us in great hands. As our team prepared for today's discussion, I received an email that really motivated us to break down our hour into meaningful, digestible bites. The email read something like this: my colleague is feeling really overwhelmed with information and struggling to figure out how he can possibly make any of this work with his budget and his historic building. Truly, he is unsure where to begin, as many of us are. As you know, I have many of those questions. So together, let's begin the process of looking at your space in ways you may have never done before. Let's look creatively at your space from an airflow perspective, just as you would approach creating your next production or new work of art. Crystal, perhaps you can help us put our risk reduction strategies related to our spaces into buckets so that we can better focus our discussion for today. Crystal?
So this is a graphic that one of the students in my group put together, really to help us orient ourselves on how we can approach risk reduction and make it a little bit less overwhelming. So we tried to organize it in terms of some top-down strategies on what you can do as an organization to really direct risk reduction, and then also some strategies that can come from the bottom up, so really are motivated by the individual, so the performer, a member of the audience coming to your venue. So really at the top, we can think about programming considerations and this having the absolute greatest impact in risk reduction. So moving to exclusively remote programming, remote performances, remote learning, where we're just completely eliminating that face-to-face contact and that potential for exposure. Then we can move down to think about administrative controls. So how can you facilitate physical distancing, increase cleaning of surfaces, and also allowing for outdoor events. And then finally, what we'll talk in much more detail about today are these engineering controls. So how can we increase ventilation? How can we make use of more outdoor air? And when we have to recirculate air, how can we make sure that we're filtering it or providing enough controls to make sure that it's safer? So those are these top-down approaches that you as an organization can provide. And then at the bottom, we can look at how can individuals also lead to their own risk reduction. And this really comes from wearing masks. We've talked a lot about that in past webinars, increased hand washing, thorough hand washing, social distancing, and then also surface cleaning as well that can be done by individuals at your venues.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Crystal. That's very helpful. So now we can take a deep breath and take a look now a little more closely at the engineering controls. And Julie, if you could help us, maybe you could suggest a process of understanding for us and improving the engineering controls in our space.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I really do like the way you phrase that question because it really is about two things: understanding your engineering systems and then improving your engineering systems. From an understanding standpoint, it's about simple questions at first. How is air moving in and out of my building? Is it coming through a louver or an opening in the roof, maybe through an air handling unit and ductwork into a space? Or is it coming through a window or a door? How is that air heated or cooled? How is it leaving the building through an exhaust grill or through a fan? Just those fundamental questions will start to get you thinking about what your next step will be. No matter what your experience level is, this is an excellent time to organize or request documentation about your building systems. And those include things like original design documents, equipment specifications, operation and maintenance manuals or service reports, testing and balancing reports, filter records. There are some excellent resources online that give you a checklist of the kind of documentation that would be helpful to have at this point in time and really moving forward. Whether or not you have good documentation, it's very likely that you'll have to do a walkthrough to fill in gaps. And that walkthrough can be very simple. It can be, a couple of people in your space looking at the space with fresh eyes. Where are the diffusers? Where are the air returns? Where are exhaust grills or exhaust fans? Stand in the space, think about how big the space is, including ceiling height, and how many people with proper social distancing rules in place may be in that space. Depending on your experience level, it may also be helpful to visually inspect your equipment. And absolutely, I would recommend working with a skilled technician or an engineer or some other type of resource for this. All the improvements that you're going to want to pursue relate to ventilation. And while no system's perfect, any system could be better. And I think that's really key. Everybody is trying to do everything they can to get a perfect system. To be honest, a lot of these systems aren't that flexible. And so you're going to want to implement improvements where it's feasible. You may want to start with basic maintenance procedures, understand how equipment is maintained, who does that maintenance, how frequently it's done. And then you may want to look at simple modifications, which in my mind apply ubiquitously to all space types. The simple modifications are looking at scheduling equipment so that it's operating at least 2 hours before a space would be occupied and 2 hours after a space is occupied. Look at your toilet exhaust and make sure it's running whenever the building is occupied. A lot of times that's controlled just by a manual switch in a bathroom. And then also look at your windows and use your windows to the extent that you can maintain comfortable conditions and sometimes even beyond those conditions. There are many more advanced approaches that relate to things that other people have talked about in these sessions, including filtration, modifying system operation that will get to the building automation systems and programming. And all of that absolutely comes into play to the extent that it's there and can be utilized and can be implemented appropriately with a skilled technician.
Great, thank you, Julie. That's so helpful for us all. If we could stay with ventilation for just a minute, we hear the term natural ventilation and mechanical ventilation. Can you help us understand what we mean by those two?
Yeah, very simple. Natural ventilation is an open window or some other opening in your building that allows fresh air from outside to move inside with no mechanical or electrical assistance. So no fans. That is almost certainly what you're dealing with in your private home, even some apartments. Often in a larger apartment building, there would also be mechanical ventilation. Mechanical ventilation is when bringing outside air into a space is assisted by fans. So mechanical ventilation almost always comes into play with commercial spaces and almost all of the arts venues above a certain size.
Excellent, great, thank you. That's really spells it out for us. Now that we're kind of set our baseline from both of you, thank you for doing that. Let's go and look at a few spaces and visualize possible situations. And I think the process we'd like to take is, let's begin with some smaller spaces and work our way into the larger venues. You know, many of our larger venues actually have smaller rooms, so this is going to be successful for all of us to look at it. But maybe help us with the visual cues that can help to determine the possibilities of improvements that we might consider. So I'm going to bring up a couple of slides for us to start looking at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Julie.
I can start talking about this. So imagine you're in this room by yourself and you're looking at it with fresh eyes. What I would look at is obviously these supply diffusers off of the exposed ductwork on the ceiling. I'd look at the placement of these windows, and I'd start to think about how this space is ventilated, where's outdoor air coming into the space, and how is the space heated and cooled. Judging from this, I'm thinking that air is returned from this space and then heated and delivered out of this ductwork. And the ventilation is probably just the operable windows. There's a chance that some outdoor air is being brought through an air handling unit and also delivered through this ductwork, but that's pretty small ductwork relative to the size of this room. So when I think about improvements in this space, I would really be looking to utilize these operable windows.
Crystal, I think you need to turn on your microphone.
Yes, okay, there we go. So to add to that, if thinking now going beyond just your HVAC system on solutions that you as a user of the room can implement to enhance the amount of ventilation, you can put some air purifiers into the space. We look at the size of the space and the need for multiple air purifiers within perhaps each corner in proximity to someone that is performing, especially if they're performing without a mask. And also use of some box fans that can be placed within the windows. When we talk about box fans, we're looking at pulling air out of the space, mounting those in the windows to make sure that you have a seal around them to then allow for the air to be vented outside.
Crystal, you mentioned air purifiers. Now actually have a question from the floor about UV air purifiers. And can you just repeat your recommendation there?
Right, so there's a range of different air purifiers that are on the market. Many of them come with a lot of bells and whistles, and one of those are UV lights within the systems. for the sake of air purification, really the emphasis is on just pulling as much air as you can through a filter. And when you have that UV component, the amount of airflow that's offered by the air purifiers is typically lower. So I tend to recommend against those units, and really just thinking about what is the size of your space, and if it is a larger space, to have a unit that pulls more air, and that's measured in terms of a CFM, or cubic feet per minute, and multiple units, like in this type of space.
Great, and there's a question here about standing fans. Does that help?
I can talk about this one. I would prefer not to see a standing fan in this space. And the reason for that is a fan will essentially push air across the room without necessarily bringing in more outdoor air. In that case, you know, a 6-foot social distancing rule, or even a 12, if you have a fan blowing across, people could be, you know, 25 feet apart, but the air is traveling at a fast speed between individuals. What I would rather see with the use of fans here is if one of these windows opens enough to utilize a box fan or some other type of fan to blow air out of the room outside. And then another window could be open, which would then in turn pull fresh air into the room. So really think about exhausting space so that fresh air will then be pulled into a space.
Excellent. Another question, we haven't really talked about the AC, air conditioning units, but this is a good question here. When it's in cooling mode, is it bringing in fresh air?
The answer to that is generally no. Most air conditioning units, like window air conditioning units, are recirculating air from inside. So basically it's taking your warm air from a space, into an air conditioning unit, across a cooling coil, and back into the space. Same air, cooler temperature. There are some AC units, as we think about them, that do have a component of outdoor air ventilation, but that is not what you would typically see.
Great, thank you. One more question I'm going to throw at you here. What is the proper airflow past a person in a space? How should air come in, and why not have fans blowing inward? I think you answered the end of that question, why not inward, but go ahead and take a stab at that for us.
My preference is to be exhausting a space, whether air is moving out, a bathroom exhaust, a kitchen exhaust, a window exhaust, and then allow other openings in your space. So another window or even an open door to allow the air to come in. I'd rather not blow air across people breathing.
Anything to add on that, Crystal?
Yes, so when we think about air crossing a person, it's really that contact time that we're interested in. So prolonged contact with that airflow that might potentially contain infectious viral material, that's when we start to become concerned for risk of infection.
Great, excellent. And a follow-up question to our UV filters is, do they work? Even from your answer, do they work?
So yes, so UV has been shown to be effective in other cases for airborne viruses. But for them to be effective, there needs to be sufficient contact time with the UV lights. And also, given how much contact time it has, how many times the air passes across the lights. So that really necessitates having a high air change within the space if that technique is going to be used. And that's typically not what's seen within commercial spaces or school spaces.
Great. Okay, so unless you have anything more to add on this picture, I'm going to go to our next slide. You okay with that? So what should be done in a space like this? Should we be propping open the doors? what's the we don't know a lot what's going on inside, but we can get a sense from the outside what might be happening.
Yeah, we don't know a lot about what's happening on the inside, but my assumption is that there's some sort of rooftop unit in this space that is likely bringing in a small amount of outside air, or alternatively, there is a heating and cooling unit that is just recirculating air from inside the space. I'm assuming there's a restroom towards probably the back of the facility that has bathroom exhaust. So what I would like to see in this space is the bathroom exhaust for certain on, the door open to the extent that that's comfortable and feasible. I don't see that these front windows are necessarily operable, and it's hard to tell what might be on the back side of this facility. Depending on the air handling, whether it's recirculating or does bring in a small amount of outdoor air, there may be some filter improvements that could be in play.
Excellent. Crystal, anything to add there?
So really, to add to what Julie's mentioned, is really focusing on these supplemental controls that we can add to the space. So air purifiers, keeping the door open for that added natural ventilation would be helpful.
Great. And do we want to recap just those two kind of basic space comparison of the first two slides? Anything you want to pull together there?
So I think what Julie mentioned first off is really, when looking at a space, is what is the size of the space? Is that's going to be critical to how much dilution you have relative to the number of occupants you have in this inside. So if you have a larger space with taller ceilings, that's helpful. And a space like this, really in contrast, you're looking at lower ceilings and smaller square footage as well.
Excellent. Okay, oh, Julie, did you want to say something?
No, I think that
Sure.
that's right.
Okay.
It's always helpful to think about, for me, I always think about things in 3 stages. The first is source reduction, and that's all of those administrative controls, the social distancing, the things that Crystal spoke about on the first slide. The second is dilution, which is how much air relative to people breathing, and how do we bring in more air? And then the last is filtration. So the air that's in a space that may be recirculating, how can we make it as fresh as possible with appropriate filtration? So just looking again at this space relative to the one we just looked at, I think the ceilings are lower. So dilution, people breathing relative to the total space may be a bigger issue here.
Gotcha. Okay, so does the ventilation in a maker space like printing studio, making studios, need to be handled differently? How about in a space like this when we have lots of folks? What should we be thinking?
My initial thought looking at this picture, and Crystal can jump in here, is just the distance between the people working on art. I'd like to see more distance between them, and also perhaps not facing each other. I think that there are often a number of air quality issues that come into play with maker spaces. VOCs associated with paints and other art supplies, and typically ventilation is something that has to be looked at carefully, whether or not we're concerned about COVID. And to the extent that those things may be in play, I would just want to enhance some of those strategies.
Right. So really, to add to Julie's point, is people facing each other. That's something that we'd like to avoid. So if you had everyone sitting on one side of the table, physically distanced and wearing masks, which is one key aspect of these maker spaces that can be achieved, unlike maybe some other music spaces.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And I think Darren has a follow-up question here along lines of office spaces.
And with some of those strategies you were talking about, do we need to consider other strategies in an office space or an artistic workspace where we're more apt to be working closely together.
I think I'll jump in here. I think no matter what, the social distancing rules need to be maintained. So whether or not it's 6 feet or 12 feet, you know, further apart is better, in my opinion, because you know, it's more distance, but also will lead to more dilution because of you know, breathing relative to a whole volume of a space. I think that the rules for offices are very similar to the rules of any occupiable spaces. I do think offices are somewhat easier to manage because they can be single occupancy. If you have a shared office space, I would very much like to see either a staggered schedule or a way for people to not share space. I don't know, Crystal, if you have anything to add to that.
I agree with you completely that offices, compared to a lot of music, are an easy space to tackle because you can achieve the physical distancing in many cases. Masks can be worn for the duration of time that people are in that space.
Great. And a little follow up with HVAC from Becky. Becky, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Yeah, I have a question about air exchange. Should we be increasing our air exchanges? And are there any particular HVAC strategies for increasing air exchanges that are easy for us to implement?
Talk about that. Absolutely, you should be increasing air exchanges with the one caveat that if you're maximizing your systems, you may also be increasing airspeed and turbulence in a zone. So to the extent that you can increase an airflow rate and still maintain comfortable conditions and appropriate air speeds, it's a good thing to do. I wouldn't say they're easily implemented. They're easily implemented by a skilled technician who understands how the air delivery rate is established for a particular space. I would not like to see in a zone that may have a recirculating system, like a split system or a fan coil unit or a window air conditioning unit that's recirculating the air. I would not like to see an increase in rate on those on that kind of equipment, because that's just recirculating air. So you'd be increasing the speed and increasing the turbulence without necessarily improving the quality.
So in those added air handling air conditioners that we stick in windows sometimes, is that fresh air that's coming in, and is that a good thing, or again, it's coming in, so that's maybe not so good, not great?
Again, it depends. If you know for certain that your wall-mounted split system or you know, your fan coil unit is ventilating, which means it's bringing air from the outside, then increasing that air from the outside, always good. If it's recirculating and there's a good chance it's only recirculating, then I would not increase the speeds or look for more output from that unit.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, Crystal and Julie, let's go on to some a large facility conversation. And let's look at a main hall, for instance. Where do we start? What's the approach in a large facility and main hall?
Yeah, a facility like this, I feel, you know, pretty good about. I believe the mechanical systems, including the primary air handling unit, would be sized with a lot of outside air to support a full house of people breathing. I believe that it's probably maintaining relatively tight thermal conditions. It's probably delivering air in a very controlled manner, which would be, low speed, slow delivery. So the turbulence is probably low, and that is probably because of acoustic considerations. And it's very likely that the unit is scheduled on a building automation system. And so the schedule itself could be modified so that you could start the unit well in advance of occupancy in this facility and keep the unit running afterwards. In this kind of facility, I might be more concerned about back of house, lobby, restrooms, and also the logistics of using the space with social distancing in those other areas.
Crystal, do you want to add anything there?
No, I agree completely. So just getting people in and out of the space, I see that as being a larger hurdle. And then what do you do about other smaller spaces, like Julie said, back of house, in particular the restrooms, coordinating safer use of those.
Great. Well, I know Frank Tavera, this is his home. We might want to ask him if he has any questions about it. Frank?
Do I have questions? Thanks, guys. Julie, I appreciate the comments you made about the facility, because you're absolutely right. Your assessment is correct. We can circulate exterior air. It is on a well-maintained system. All of that, so I think we're pretty much state of the art. My big concern is the issue of social distancing and capacity. If you look at our facility now, there's 2,600 tickets that can be sold. Ideally, we'd love to sell as many of those as possible. 6 feet doesn't really make a great financial model for us if we have to distance. What are are there any things that we can do to kind of mitigate that risk of the social distancing besides putting on masks and forcing people to sit next to each other? Is there anything above and beyond that is doable in a venue of our size, or the Bushnell or the Schubert, New Haven, et cetera? So.
I think it's a really great question, and it's a question on everyone's mind. However, this is a bit of a casual response, but I don't think we can engineer our way out of social distancing requirements. There's no modification that I would recommend to this already state-of-the-art HVAC system that would allow us to go beyond the limits set by social distancing rules.
That's not the answer I wanted.
And this is something that we have discussed in past times, is if you do have family units already, to then be able to bring those groups of people to sit together, and then be able to then distance those units if there is like a family performance, to increase seating capacity.
Well, the good news and bad news is that capacity issues will not allow us to open our doors for quite some time. So by that time, hopefully there is a better social response that can be done as opposed to a technical response. I did want to follow up as well on the zoning side of this. You can see the main hall that's right there, but to your point, we have back of house, we have restrooms. Is it to our advantage to put them all on different zones and to treat that air handling differently per section, or should the facility just be on one kind of service, like the circulation all be at that same level while we're at capacity? Does that make sense?
Many facilities like yours are zoned, and I do think it is appropriate to continue to treat the zones as separate entities with separate needs. It would be easy to say, go full bore on everything all the time, and keep it easy. However, I don't know that would be good in the long run for your equipment, and I don't know that you would gain benefit from that. Again, go back to how the spaces are going to be used, and then how the equipment serving that space can be modified for an improvement.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. So can you both help all of our audience with a handful of questions that their facility manager well, either for the director to ask the facility manager, or for the facility manager to ferret out. What's a handful of questions that we should ask them? Is this happening? Is this happening? What can I do to help? Those kind of questions.
I can talk about that. If you have a facility manager that you're working with, in addition to some of the things I said at the beginning of this session about collecting documentation and asking for just some general understanding and discussion around the kind of systems you have, so that afterwards you can, go look up what it all means and try to piece it together for yourself. In addition to requesting the documentation in a walkthrough, some more specific questions may be, what is the schedule of my building? What time do mechanical systems come on and what time do they go off? How can I control, bathroom exhaust fans? Is that done by the building? Are they running 24/7? Or do I have to be cognizant of user controls like switches in a room? Can I open and close the windows? Are there any problems, with that in ways that might not be obvious? Security, pests, noise. Talk through that. And for certain, some of the questions, that are coming in during this session, what is the filtering situation? Have the filters been replaced? Can they be upgraded? So it's sort of this concept of, schedule, maintenance, outdoor air, filtering, and what you're allowed to do in your own space to make user improvements.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you. Crystal, anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, that's an excellent summary.
That's on target. Great. Okay, so let's wrap this all up together. The small venue spaces, the larger venues, let's go and Crystal has created this fantastic document, which I think is going to help us all look at the flow chart of possible solutions for your natural and mechanical air handling systems. Can you walk us through this a little bit?
Yes, of course. So again, I give credit to a student in my lab and also through conversations with Julie and others and other guiding organizations who have made recommendations for COVID response. And this is really to follow up on Julie's checklist of questions to be asking a facility and thinking about each space within your venue or building. And what are the HVAC capacities at the moment? So if we were to take a walk through this decision matrix, we can say, well, going back to Eric's original question, is there mechanical ventilation within the space, or are we relying on natural ventilation? And that's really the cross points on how we go about dealing with ventilation related questions. If we go to a space that has mechanical ventilation, we talked about the importance of outdoor air as we're not recirculating any air within those spaces. Also related to that is demand controlled ventilation, where that is guided, the ventilation is guided based on the occupancy within the space. That's recommendation is for it to be disabled. So within these spaces also that we can't have maximum outdoor air, then we start to think about filtration. There's been a lot of discussion about use of different types of filters. The filters that have been recommended for use are called MERV 13 filters. So this is a filter that is able to remove quite effectively sizes of aerosol that could potentially contain infectious viral material to be installed within air handling units. When doing any of these installations, we always suggest that the filter assembly in which they are assembled has been properly commissioned and maintained. So ensuring that that filter is free from any gaps and voids where any air can bypass use of the filter. So then moving further down that checklist, we can start going back to Becky's question about air change and solutions for increasing the amount of air change. There are guidance available from ASHRAE, specifically with their code 62.1 on what recommended standards are. Important to note that these are minimums and values should be exceeded amongst these standards. So on the second arm of the flow chart is thinking about natural ventilation, and we've talked about this in some of the specific spaces, is are there operable windows, being sure to really leverage these windows and make the most of them, thinking about use of box fans to move more air out, and also use of the air purifiers as well within the decision matrix.
Excellent. Judy, I think you have a couple of follow-up questions there.
Yes, I do. I wanted to ask about what's considered a regular basis for filter changing.
Yeah, the regular rule of thumb is quarterly with each season, every 3 months. However, I haven't seen a filter change schedule at every 3 months in quite a while. More typical is 6 months or even a year. And that really depends on the equipment, the size of the equipment and the type of filters that are being used. I do think that ASHRAE is recommending that if you can allow your filter change frequency to extend, that may be beneficial. So it's the one time you hear from a standards organization that letting something slide a bit is beneficial. I do think that if you are in a facility that does have a strong potential for viral contamination, you have to be very careful with filter changes at this time. ASHRAE is recommending that the person doing the filter change should do it when the unit is shut down. Should be equipped with a properly fitted respirator, N95 or higher, eye protection, disposable gloves, maybe even coveralls. The filter should be bagged. It could even be disinfected, but let's go with bagging. And then afterwards, quick change to clean up and get out of the space.
And also, would there need to be more frequent, or from what you're saying, maybe not, change of filters in a dance studio, for instance, where there is a lot of heavy breathing, movement in the room?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the bigger concern with filters and frequency of change is really particulates and dust. So I find that following a construction project or something like that, you absolutely want your filters changed. That's where you're going to see dust on the filters. I haven't seen research related to areas where people are breathing more, needing more frequent filter changes. I don't know if you've seen that, Crystal.
No, I think you're spot on. When we have more particulate matter, say in a construction site, or we talked previously about a clay studio, that might necessitate more frequent changes.
Okay, great, that's fantastic, thank you. John Carl, I believe you have a follow-up question you'd like to ask.
Yes, good morning. Many people on the call today, including me, are from small nonprofit organizations. Can you help us understand the financial feasibility of implementing these changes?
Yeah, when I think about the practical changes that individual users can implement in the space, I don't view them as particularly costly. When we start getting to modifications on central building equipment, building automation systems, certainly the addition of UV, that's when things really start getting costly, because you're involving professionals and you're involving expensive equipment that, to be honest, is on back order right now. So is that a premium cost? In my opinion, you really want to focus on the things you can do, and you can do in a timely manner within the limitations of your budgets.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Julie. We all have those concerns, and I think that helps a lot. So I'm going to back up just for 1 second on a question that came in through the Q&A about exhaust systems over the stage. And since that pulls from the whole area, is there a concern that an audience member's germs are going to go up and pass the performers and create a problem for the performers if their exhaust system is over the stage?
Julie, you can add to this. So yes, we want to be aware of the airflows. And we should be thinking about if the performers on stage are wearing masks, or if they're breathing at a higher ventilation rate, if they're playing an instrument unmasked or singing. So that is of concern. Can we introduce alternative flow paths within air circulation? That might be slightly more challenging to achieve. So there might be some supplemental controls that could be added. Julie, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I am somewhat concerned with that scenario, putting aside the fact that I would expect an audience to be fully masked. I have gotten a lot of questions about hotspots in either office settings or even labs, where we're delivering air on one end of the room and maybe returning air on the other end of the room. Maybe you don't want to be sitting below the return. Is that a hotspot? And the theoretical response to that is typically a mechanical design is to create a fully mixed scenario within a space. So it's not as if there's a hotspot. We're kind of imagining everything ubiquitously the same, right? Air quality consistent across a space, air temperature consistent across a space. However, in a practical sense, it's not fully mixed, and users modify spaces which may or may not contribute to the mixing. So if I had a choice about where to sit in a room, it wouldn't necessarily be under the exhaust in a shared space, because all the air from that shared space is moving in that direction and out. I don't want to create fear about that, because I do think with proper dilution, proper air delivery, proper PPE, the risk with, your location in a room is very low. However, it's just another thing to be cognizant of.
Thank you, Julie and Crystal. So I want to leave Connecticut for just a minute and head out to Philadelphia. We have a question from Chelsea at the Wilma Theater in Philadelphia. And I think we all need the answer to this question. She's the facility manager, and one of her jobs is to go on site prior to the space being safe. She has several inspections coming up and wondering what is the best way for her to keep herself and her family safe as she goes through this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And to the extent that I've been involved in space walkthroughs, from the earliest time of this, it's something that many of us talked about early on. And I will give some practical tips. First off, chances are if you're doing an inspection, you're with a smaller group in a facility that's likely not in use. So you can take some comfort in that the facility will be in low occupancy. Practical tips about doing walkthroughs and inspections with other people is you really want a game plan, right? You want to know where you're going to show up. You're going to meet outside. I would recommend one person be designated as a note taker, one person take pictures, one person lead the group. So know your roles. So you're not wasting time fumbling around in a mechanical room with who's doing what or repeating each other's roles. You absolutely want to be masked. You absolutely want to maintain social distancing rules. And then just another simple tip is, especially if these walkthroughs are long, a full day, as time goes on, you'll start to feel more comfortable around each other and you'll start inching towards each other. It may be helpful for one of you to set a timer, maybe every half hour, even every 20 minutes, every hour. That's just an alarm to remind the group, let's socially distance. Let's not talk in the mechanical room. Let's take it outside. And just thinking about how your workflow can be improved so everybody can stay safe. That's really key, and communicate it before you're on site.
Thank you. You've just channeled Sten, I believe. This is, as we do our site visits, we actually send out a couple of basic goals for all of us, and we then plan out every 5 to 7 minutes what room we're going to be in, and how many people can fit. And if there's not enough room for all of us, then we and keep our distance, then we spread it out. So boy, what great advice. We all want to stay safe, and even if your job takes you into uncharted territories, make sure you stay safe. So thank you, Julie. Crystal, is there anything you needed to add to that?
No, that's excellent guidance.
Yeah. So along that line, John Carl, I'm gonna switch over to you. And in our recent visits, we talked a lot about restrooms, and I think you have a great question here about restrooms.
Yeah, in the building that we're in, one of the concerns that I have about reopening our office is that I'm concerned about the lack of ventilation in the restroom. And what are your recommendations for that? Is restricting the number of people in the restrooms enough, or are there other things we can do to the air handling system?
Yeah, so restrooms are typically exhaust only. So if you have an exhaust, and I'm assuming you do, you want to make sure no exhaust.
Nope.
That's
not in any of them in the building.
Yeah, I do see that as problematic. That is not in compliance with building code. And I think that you're going to want to look for strategies to provide some exhaust to the bathroom, or look for alternative bathroom locations if possible. I know this is tricky. By far, I definitely recommend single occupancy. And I think I also saw a question regarding hand dryers, and I do not like the use of hand dryers in that they, again, increase airspeed and turbulence in a space.
So right along that line of, well, I guess it's the idea of classrooms, the idea of smaller spaces, kitchens. What do we do if we're in the culinary arts and we're teaching cooking? Is that big vent helpful? What should we do about air in kitchens and in classes for kitchens?
Julie, I can start off and then you can take over and add. So kitchens are an area that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because there's very high potential for levels of chemical exposures, especially from natural gas stoves. So we're always thinking about, what does exhaust look like and how can we decrease exposure to these chemical contaminants? And this pairs really well when we start to think about airborne viral material, because we're going to be handling it the exact same way. So those very large exhausts that you see above stoves, those are fantastic in cases like this. You're pulling out air directly from the facility. So those should be on for the entire duration of that cooking class.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The exhaust fans are there for a reason, and they're helpful in this situation. I know there are noise concerns. It's annoying to shout over a fan, but that is the situation we're in.
Absolutely, good. Okay, well, thank you. A lot of questions are coming in, and most of them have to do with the diagram that you shared with us. The question is, can we get that diagram? And the answer is absolutely. Shoreline Arts Alliance will put it up on our website, so that's available to you. We'll also email it out. Crystal, that's okay, right? I should have asked, I suppose. Can we send this out to all the folks who attended today?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great. It's clearly, I mean, the questions are the same one over and over. They really want that. So that's fantastic. Absolutely. There are still so many questions coming in. And of course, here we are, unbelievable. Somehow another hour has passed and we've learned so much. Julie, thank you so much for joining this team with us. We hope we can keep you around for many of our other times together. Crystal, again, thank you. You guys just are continuing to offer the arts sector huge advice and with scientific advice in this. And again, we're so proud that your information is being shared not only here in Connecticut, but as Crystal shared with me the other day, it's being lots of folks in Canada. You saw the question from Philadelphia. They're coming from across the country, and I guess we should start saying all around the world are looking at these. So your information is vital. Remember that we have all of our past webinars on the Shoreline Arts Alliance YouTube channel. So just type in Shoreline Arts Alliance and in YouTube, and you'll find it, or you can come to the website. And today you'll also we'll start later this afternoon releasing some of the videos from our site visits, and you'll want to take a look at them. We're trying to make them little tiny vignettes so that you can target them, your needs. If you're interested in us to take a look at your space more closely, don't hesitate to ask. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we're sure going to try to bundle information together. Our next webinar is August 13th at this point. We may add, there's so much information that we didn't get to cover today, but we'll just keep watching. We'll add to that. Again, thank you for your efforts as arts leaders in making sure that you're keeping your staff, yourself, and your patrons safe, and thinking and working together on this. And thank you again from the bottom of my heart, Crystal and now Julie, for you guys are rounding out a spectacular team. And don't forget those task force members. They're there to gather questions. The sooner you can get us the questions, the sooner we can get them in the pathway to get them into one of these seminars. So Julie or Crystal, I know we missed the things that you want to talk about. Is there anything you want to throw out here in the last 30 seconds we have?
So it's not completely related to HVAC. I did see some questions coming in about face shields being used as an alternative for masks, and really just to emphasize that the face shield should not be a substitute for a mask. So face shields can provide protection against droplets that are expelled when coughing or sneezing, but they will not provide protection for aerosols. So the pairing of the face shield and the mask is recommended, but really first line for using the mask.
Excellent. And Julie?
Yeah, I just have a question really about logistics. All these questions I could answer. Am I able to respond to some of these questions when this webinar is done?
Absolutely. I'll download all these questions and then we'll be able to send some. I'll get them out to you. So it might take 24 hours, folks, for a couple of these questions to be answered. But yes, absolutely. Thank you for offering. And to that end, that we have this pre-show, pre-webinar show, I guess I should say, of many slides that you all have sent us. We went through a lot of the slides this week and last week and took a look at what we think is going on in your venues. Don't hesitate to send me additional slides if you haven't yet. If you're not in the slideshow, we'd love to add you, but it's really helpful to be able to pull even just some pictures. So if you have pictures of your air handling system or your bathroom or something that you think is unique, don't hesitate. Send them to office@shorelinearts.org or eric@shorelinearts.org or any of the task force members, and they'll feed them my direction. Okay, again, on behalf of Yale School of Public Health and the Shoreline Arts Alliance and all of our wonderful helpers here in this process, I wish you a great rest of the week. Well, I guess it's almost over here. And have a great weekend. We'll see you shortly. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.